The call came in on a Wednesday afternoon while I was in a meeting with two of my senior consultants. I didn't recognize the number. I silenced it, let it go to voicemail. 20 minutes later, when the meeting ended and I checked my phone, I had to read the notification twice before I trusted what I was seeing. I went into my office. I closed the door. I sat down and pressed play. The voice on the other end was professional, composed. She said she was applying for a senior position at a firm here in Atlanta, and that my name had come up as someone familiar with her professional background. She said she would appreciate a call at my convenience to discuss serving as a reference. Her name was Destiny Collier. Destiny Collier was the woman my husband had left me for 8 months before our divorce was finalized. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. I set my phone face down on my desk. I looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline, the view I had chosen this office specifically for, and I sat there for a long moment thinking about the particular shape of things, about how something can be entirely over for years and still find a way to knock on your door on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, as if time means nothing at all. My name is Vivian Elaine Moore, Vivian Elaine Carter for 15 years, but I reclaimed my name the day the divorce was finalized, and I have not missed the other one for a single second since. I am 44 years old. I run a consulting firm in Midtown Atlanta with 19 employees and a client list that has grown every year since I opened the doors. My name is above the entrance, only my name. And I want to tell you how I got here, because the voicemail on that Wednesday afternoon was not the beginning of this story. It was the final line of one chapter and the unexpected opening of another. To understand why I responded the way I did, you need to understand everything that came before it. I met Marcus Carter at a business conference in Atlanta when I was 26 years old. He was on an entrepreneurship panel, and he was the kind of man who commanded a room without appearing to try. He had ideas that were concrete and a manner that was warm. And he found me at the networking dinner afterward and said, "I was hoping you'd still be here," and I believed every word of it. We dated for 2 years. We got married in the spring. We bought a house in Decatur, Georgia, with a backyard we talked about raising children in, and we talked endlessly about building something that mattered, both of us. At the beginning, we both genuinely meant it. The business started as an idea over dinner one evening, a consulting firm for mid-sized companies that needed more than they could do alone, but couldn't access the big firms. We wrote the business plan together at our kitchen table over 3 weeks. We pooled our savings. We named it Carter and Moore, both names, Marcus's suggestion, which I received as a gesture of equal partnership. Carter and Moore Consulting grew slowly and then all at once, the way things often do. The first 2 years were lean, shared office space, uncertain months, clients who were curious but not yet committed. We worked weekends and holidays and evenings, and we did not complain about it because we were building something that was ours, and that felt like enough. I remember a specific Tuesday evening in our 3rd year when we landed a contract that doubled our annual revenue overnight. We stayed in the office after the rest of the team left, ordered takeout, sat across from each other, and talked for 4 hours about what we were going to build, the people we would hire, the clients we would serve, what the firm would look like in 10 years. Marcus was more animated than I had seen him since the early days, more like himself, I thought, more like the man I had married. I think about that evening sometimes, about how certain I was in that moment, about everything I could not see from where I was sitting. The shift began when the business started doing well. I have thought about this more than almost anything else in the years since. The way that success can reveal things about a person that struggle kept carefully concealed. When there was nothing to divide, we were equal partners without question. When there started to be something worth having, things changed in ways subtle enough that I kept explaining them away. It started with decisions. Marcus began making them without me. Not dramatic ones at first, just operational matters he would present as already resolved when I came to the table. A vendor relationship he had restructured, a key hire he had made, a client approach he had already committed us to. Each one had an explanation in isolation. Over months, taken together, they were telling me something I was not ready to hear directly. I raised it. He said I was reading too much into things. I raised it again with specific examples. He said I was slowing down momentum. He said that in a fast-moving environment, waiting for full consensus on every operational decision wasn't a luxury they could afford. I heard they, not we, they. And somewhere in those conversations, the language changed in other ways too. Our company became my company in casual conversation. Our clients became my clients. Our vision became what I'm trying to build here. He said these things without emphasis, without apparent awareness. The way you say something you decided was true so long ago that the saying of it no longer registers. I noticed every single time. I let it pass every single time, because I told myself it was just a way of speaking. Because the alternative, that he had genuinely begun to see everything we built together as his alone, was something I was not yet prepared to look at directly. It was not just a way of speaking. I found out about Destiny on a Thursday evening in March, 5 years ago. I had a client dinner that was canceled last minute, a genuine family emergency on the client side, nothing suspicious, and I came home 2 hours earlier than Marcus expected. His car was in the driveway. The house was quiet in a way that didn't feel like quiet. What I found that evening required no interpretation. There was no ambiguity, no alternative explanation that needed to be considered. I stood in the doorway of my own bedroom, and I understood immediately and completely what I was looking at. I want to tell you something about that moment, because I think it matters. I did not cry. I was aware of this, aware that the tears I expected didn't come. What came instead was something colder and more permanent, something closing inside me, a door, quietly, with a finality I could feel in the center of my chest. I said very clearly, "You have until tomorrow morning to find somewhere else to be." And I walked to the guest room. I locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I did not fall apart. Instead, I made a list. Not a list of grievances or of everything that had been done to me. Those things were real, and they would need their own time, but that time was not this moment. This moment was for the practical next steps that would determine what the rest of my life looked like. Because I had spent 15 years learning to move forward, and that was a skill I was not going to waste on a breakdown that served no one, least of all me. Item 1 on that list was an attorney, not because I had decided with absolute certainty what I was going to do yet, though I was closer to certain than I was acknowledging even to myself, but because I needed to understand the landscape before anyone else had the chance to define it for me. Carter & Moore's operational structure had been shifting for 3 years. I needed to know what was mine before someone told me a version of what was mine that served their interests rather than the truth. What my attorney found over the following 2 weeks was not a surprise. It was a confirmation of what some part of me had been quietly accumulating evidence for without fully naming it. Marcus had been restructuring the business for 18 months, new client contracts executed in his name only, A subsidiary LLC formed without my knowledge or signature. Operational accounts gradually redirected over a period long enough that the pattern wasn't obvious month to month, but was unmistakable when you looked at the full 18 months together. He had been building, methodically and deliberately, a structure that would allow him to argue in a divorce proceeding that his interest in the business was significantly larger than mine, that Carter and Moore, the company with my name on the door, was fundamentally his. My attorney laid the documents on the table between us and said, he was positioning to buy you out at a fraction of your actual equity value. I sat with that for a long moment, and then I said, what do we do? What we did took 11 months. 11 months of forensic accounting, of depositions, of legal filings and counterfilings, and a mediation process that Marcus entered believing he had already won, and exited having agreed to terms that his own attorney had visibly not anticipated. He had not accounted for the records I kept. Over years of watching our quietly become my, I had developed a habit of documentation I could not have explained the purpose of at the time. Every significant decision, every operational change, every contract, every email thread that felt important enough to save, notes in a system Marcus did not know I maintained, organized in a way that a forensic accountant could follow without difficulty. On the second day of mediation, Marcus's attorney presented their final offer, a buyout figure roughly 40% of what my equity was actually worth, based on a valuation methodology my attorney had already dismantled in a memo the week before. Marcus sat across the table with the expression I recognized from 15 years of meetings, the one he used when he believed a decision was already made and he was simply waiting for the formality of acceptance. My attorney slid a folder across the table. She said, "Before we respond to the offer, we'd like to walk through some documentation." What was in that folder was 4 years of evidence presented clearly and without drama. The forensic accountant's findings, contract records, operational emails, every piece of documentation that told the story of what had actually been happening inside Carter and Moore, as opposed to the story Marcus had prepared to tell. Marcus's expression changed about 12 minutes into the presentation. I watched it change precisely, the way you watch something when you have been waiting for it and you want to see it clearly when it arrives. I felt nothing dramatic in that moment, not triumph, not satisfaction, just the particular clarity that comes when the facts are so unambiguous that emotion doesn't have anywhere useful to go. I walked away with what was mine. Carter and Moore Consulting was dissolved, its assets divided. I had enough to start something new. I started Vivian Moore Consulting 14 months after the divorce was finalized. One employee, my former assistant Maya, who had watched everything unfold from the inside and had chosen, without being asked, to come with me. That choice meant more than I knew how to say. I want to tell you about those early months with some specificity because I think the specificity matters. The story of rebuilding is not a montage. It is specific and slow and full of moments where you are genuinely not certain of the outcome. I made 47 new business calls in the first month. I tracked every one of them on a spreadsheet Maya set up the first week. Of those 47, 11 people took the call. Of those 11, 4 agreed to a meeting. Of those 4, 1 became a client. 1 client in a month. 1. That was the beginning of Vivian Moore Consulting. I did not tell anyone how hard it was, not because I was ashamed, I wasn't, but because I had decided that the version of myself I was going to put into the professional world was the version that was building, not the version that was uncertain. Some things you carry privately so that the weight of them doesn't become part of your story before you've decided what your story is. There were evenings in that first year when I sat in my parking garage for 10 minutes before I had the energy to go upstairs, when I looked at the month's numbers and felt the specific fear of having bet everything on yourself and not yet knowing if the bet was going to pay off. I felt those things fully, and then I went upstairs and I kept working. By the end of year 2, I had 8 employees and revenue that exceeded what Carter & Moore had generated in its strongest year. By year 3, I had 12 employees and had been featured in a regional business publication as one of Atlanta's fastest-growing consulting firms. By year 4, I had moved into a larger office, still midtown, still good light, bigger view, and I had 19 people coming to work every morning in a space that had my name above the entrance and only my name. I heard things about Marcus through the professional community over those years, the way you hear about someone who moves in the same circles when you are no longer in the same room. The subsidiary LLC had not performed as projected. Several significant clients had moved on. He had made hires that hadn't worked out, which in a professional services business is the kind of information that travels quickly and sticks. I noted these things when I heard them. I did not take pleasure in them, which surprised me more than I expected. His story had simply stopped being connected to mine. I had my own story to tend to, and that was taking all of my attention. And then it was a Wednesday afternoon in October, and my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I listened to the voicemail 3 times. Destiny Collier's voice was exactly as composed and professional as I would have expected. She was pursuing a new opportunity. My name had come up as someone familiar with her professional background. She would appreciate a call at my convenience. She did not mention Marcus. She did not acknowledge our connection. She spoke as if she were calling a professional contact she had encountered at a conference somewhere along the way. I sat with this for the rest of the afternoon and into the evening. My first instinct was not to respond, to let the voicemail sit unanswered the way some things deserve simply to be left. But the more I sat with it, the more that felt incomplete. Not because I wanted to say something cruel, cruelty is expensive and doesn't compound, but because silence felt like letting the specific absurdity of that moment pass without any acknowledgement at all, and it deserved acknowledgement. I called her back the following morning, before my first meeting, coffee in hand, from my office with my name on the door. She answered on the second ring, thanked me warmly for calling back, began her explanation. I let her finish, and then I said, "Destiny, I know exactly who you are, and I'm quite certain you know who I am." Silence. I said, "I'm not going to be your reference, not because I want to harm your career. I genuinely don't wish you any harm. But the fact that you called me specifically tells me something about your judgment that the company you're applying to deserves to assess for themselves without my endorsement complicating the picture." She said, "I wasn't sure if you—" I said, "I have known who you were since the Thursday evening 5 years ago when I came home early from a canceled dinner. I've simply had more important things to give my attention to since then." She didn't say anything. I said, "Good luck with your search," and I ended the call. I set my phone down, looked at the skyline, and after a moment I laughed, not bitterly, not triumphantly, something lighter than that, something that felt, honestly, like the last small piece of a very long chapter finally settling into place. My assistant knocked 30 seconds later. My 9:30 was ready. I straightened my jacket, walked into the conference room, and sat across from 3 potential clients. That meeting became a 6-figure contract. I have thought about that Wednesday many times since, about the particular shape of that voicemail and what it asked of me and how I chose to respond, about the improbability of it, about the fact that of all the people in Atlanta with professional standing in this industry, she called me specifically. I don't know if she genuinely didn't understand who I was to Marcus. I don't know if she knew and called anyway out of some combination of audacity and desperation that I don't have enough information to judge. I only know what my life looks like from where I'm standing now, and where I'm standing now is exactly where I intend to be. Vivian Moore Consulting turns 4 years old this spring, 19 employees, a client list that has grown every quarter, an office with good light and a view of the city, and my name above the entrance. Still, only my name, which gives me a specific and undiminished satisfaction every single morning when I walk through the door. I want to say something to anyone listening who is in a partnership, professional or personal, where the language has quietly shifted, where ours has become mine without anyone naming the change out loud, where decisions arrive at the table already made and you find yourself performing consensus rather than practicing it, where your name is still on the sign, but something about it feels different than it used to. Pay attention to that feeling. Pay attention to the language. Pay attention to the paperwork and who controls it and whose name is on things and whether that has shifted from what it was at the beginning. These things don't announce themselves dramatically. They move slowly, incrementally, and they count on you being too busy or too trusting or too committed to the version of the relationship you believe in to look at the version that is actually operating. And if you find yourself having to rebuild, standing at the beginning of something new with less than you should have and more determination than anyone expected, I want you to know this. The thing you build alone is yours in a way that the thing you built with the wrong person never fully was. There is a quality to that ownership, complete, uncontested, undivided, that is worth every difficult thing it took to arrive at it. Vivian Moore, my name, my door, my company. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Ziri Chronicles, because every week we come back here and tell another story, another truth, another woman who refused to let someone else write the final chapter of her life. My name is Zuri, and I'll see you next time.